Morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome for joining us for this webinar, how building the electricity distribution grid can benefit to Southeast Asia needs. My name is Dimitri Pesha, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you today. I'm Director Power System Transformation at Agora Energiewende. Agora is an independent think tank which is also working closely on policy development to ensure that we can collectively propose the best strategies to reach a clean, affordable, and secure energy system, and this in all around the world. So we are active in several countries, and today we are looking very specifically at the Southeast Asian region with, I think, a quite exciting new policy brief that we are releasing today. And I think it's particularly relevant also in a very specific global moment for the world and also for the Southeast Asian region. The recent energy supply disruptions have indeed put, again, a lot of emphasis on energy security, which is back in the forefront of the policy agenda. And at the same time, we know that electricity demand in this region, but also more globally, is rising or expected to rise even further. And also that we have an emergence of widespread technological solutions for generation, but also distributed resources such as solar, PV, batteries, electric vehicles. So this is the global trends in which we are actually really perceiving this development in the field. But, and this is what we want to address today, we also see that the distribution grid, which is the technology, or let's say the interface of all these technologies connected to the system, is becoming an important bottleneck to the transition. There is more and more difficulties to connect actually those new loads and new generation in the grid. And we believe the distribution grid needs to become the first mile of the energy transition. So this is exactly what we will focus today in the webinar. And we will draw on some of the recent insights generated by Agora Energiewende. We will explore how policymakers and regulators can respond to this challenge of distribution grid modernization, how we can turn the bottleneck into a new foundation for resilient, affordable, and clean power system. So I'm very excited to have this discussion with experts today and some input presentation. You, the audience, are more than welcome to contribute with your question. You have a way to interact with us. You can post actually Q&A directly in the box in Zoom, and you can also put comments. And we will try to bring some of those questions back into the discussion and ask some of the panelists or presenters to answer them directly. So over the next 90 minutes or so, we will have a framing presentation from my colleague Arne from Step Out, with project lead Power Systems Transformation at Agora. He will walk us through the key findings of our policy brief. And then we will hear some reflection from Dr. Terinia Supasa from the ASEAN Center of Energy on how distributed energy resources are spreading within Southeast Asia. And then we'll have a broader discussion with panelists from Pakistan, South Korea, and Australia that I will present in a minute. So, as I said, do not hesitate to interact with posting your question. We bring them in the discussion. And with that, without further ado, I will pass over to my colleague Arne van Step Out, which will give us the first framing presentation. Thanks, Arne.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and welcome also from my side to everyone. It's my pleasure today to present to you our latest policy brief, From Last Mile to First Mile, Policy Priorities for Modernizing Distribution Grids. So let's dive straight in. I want to start with basically the central thesis of our brief, which is to say that we need to change how we think about distribution grids. For those of us that even think about distribution grids already at all, we think that instead of this traditional model, which we used to have, where we saw distribution grids as the last mile, it's just passive infrastructure that delivers electricity generated at the transmission level to the consumers. This one-way flows, predictable demand, a set and forget approach. We need to transition from that to thinking of the distribution grid as the first mile of the power system, the dynamic frontier of a decentralizing power system where most renewable supply, storage, and electrified demand is going to connect two-way flows, a digitally enabled and actively managed system. And we want to especially focus on this because this challenge is really significant. Distribution grids represent more than 90% of global grid infrastructure, and changing this model for all of that infrastructure is going to require some very deliberate and scale action. I want to start first with the presentation with delving a little bit more into why we think this shift is necessary. And once that is done, I will move to the how, the policy priorities that we've identified for making this happen. And right at the end, come back to 2 points around governance and specifically the opportunity for Southeast Asia. But so first, the why. Why should we do this? Well, because basically the rapid exponential growth of distributed energy resources. Demand and renewable supply are growing quickly, and they are increasingly connecting to the distribution grid. And this is changing the operational reality of these grids. So here in the figure, to illustrate it, you see the projected growth of distributed solar PV, of battery storage and electrical vehicles. And what this means, seeing these large increases of such assets in the grid for the operations of a distribution grid, is what I already said, bidirectional power flows. You're seeing larger and faster swings between a solar-rich midday and an electrified evening peak. And if you don't manage this, what you will get is more frequent localized congestion, voltage issue, overloads, other types of issues for the distribution grid. What that brings as consequences is already visible in some of the front-runner markets where DR deployment has outpaced distribution grid modernization efforts. So 2 numbers just to give an illustration of the scale and the speed at which this can happen. In the UK, about 173 gigawatt of capacity is currently awaiting connection to the distribution grid. Just under 30 of that is new demand. UK overall, there's around 700 gigawatts in the queue. This is to say that some of these projects are speculative. Not all of these need to materialize or even should materialize, but that's part of the issue. Not only is the infrastructure failing to absorb new assets, also the processes around it that are managing this access are failing to manage the new situation. Something very similar in the Netherlands, where there's been a 7-fold increase in the connection queue for large connections. So that's connections with a power demand of more than 3 times 80 amperes in this case, but where we've gone from 2 gigawatts to 14 gigawatts in the span of 4 years, from 2,500 to 22,000 requests in the connection queue. And this has consequences beyond the grid sector, because delayed connections undermine clean energy and electrification progress, and IEA modeling has shown that grid delays could lead to a near tripling of annual power sector emissions by 2050. So what is needed to avoid this is early and sustained action, and at a scale that is really impressive. So you see here, again, IEA modeling, the estimation of grid investment needs. These are annual investment needs, so investments every year. Historically, in that period, 2016 to 2022, we've been investing at around 300 billion dollars per year. In the announced pledges scenario and net zero emission scenario, this increases to even over $1 trillion per year in the period 2030 to 2050. And roughly 3/4 of that needs to go to the distribution grid. So that's $750 billion per year of investment that is needed. And because of the scale of this investment, it's really important that we take advantage of the opportunity that DERs present, which is what I want to get to next. Because the rise of consumer-owned distributed energy resources, or just DERs in general, offers a unique opportunity to accelerate grid modernization at lower costs. As I already said, if you don't manage them, you get issues: reverse power flows, new demand peaks, local congestion and equipment overload, or the bloated connections and project delays that I just showed from the UK and the Netherlands as an illustrative example. But they can create a lot of value for the power system. And that is, if you actively manage the DERs, they can provide a range of services. They can provide local congestion relief, which can defer or avoid grid investment or generation investment even. They can provide system-wide services, balancing and flexibility or frequency and voltage support. They can accelerate the connection process for themselves by using their flexibility, but also by locally helping to create more hosting capacity in grids for other assets. And they have a range of additional benefits. They can improve the resilience by strengthening the distribution grids, and they can also improve energy access in the vast series of power systems where this is still an important matter, of course. One example to illustrate that is some work we did prior in 2024, where we just looked at the German power system and tried to quantify the benefits of using household flexibility to run the power system. And so we found there that in the year 2035 alone, the German power system could save almost 5 billion euros in power system costs by using household EVs, heat pumps, and storage flexibly. It's around 10% of total electricity consumption that you can make flexible through this. And that, of course, are substantial savings that we think are very much worth pursuing. That's the why. That's why we think this mindset needs to change and what opportunities are on the table here. Next is the how. The solutions for distribution grid modernization, many of them are proven and deployable today. What is now needed is the policy that will drive their adoption. So 5 priorities, like I say, 3 across the 3 grid policy domains, so planning, deployment, and operations, and then 2 cross-cutting enablers, digitalisation, and transmission distribution coordination. I want to go through each of them now in turn, quickly highlight the key challenges we see for each, the priority actions that policymakers should act on according to us, and then also flag 2 good practice examples of where these things are already happening in practice. So let's start with planning and investment. Here we think we need to shift from reactive reinforcement logic to an anticipatory grid development logic. The key challenges here are, as I said, reactive planning that is disconnected from energy and electrification strategies, in some cases even from transmission grid planning. The regulatory bias towards capital expenditure over alternatives, which is part of what leads to the next point, which is the underutilization of what are called non-wire solutions. So instead of investing in bigger transformers or cables, are you using DERs, as we'll get to in a second? Are you using grid enhancing technologies and so on? Financial constraints, as I said, there's a lot of investment needed, and especially in emerging markets and developing economies, that is a challenge for certain utilities to meet. And then supply chain bottlenecks for critical grid equipment like cables and transformers, where prices and delivery times have doubled in many places. Priority actions on this front is mandating integrated scenario-based planning that is linked to the wider energy system. It's enabling anticipatory investment that is based on such robust planning to make sure any anticipatory investment is well targeted. Addressing the capital expenditure bias via performance-based regulation and TOTEX, or total expenditure regulation. Requiring the evaluation of non-wire solutions before reinforcement. In principle, the preceding point should lead to that, but because this is a new thing for all of utilities, we think that mandating such an evaluation can be a way of helping to adopt this new practice. And then addressing financial barriers and creating demand feasibility long-term for equipment that gives manufacturers the kind of confidence they need to invest in capacity. Again, as you see, we're touching on them very lightly. There's more details on each of these in the brief, but just to give the overview. 2 practical examples that we want to point to. In the Netherlands in 2022, in response to what we were seeing earlier, there was a grid congestion plan that was introduced. And this plan we see recognizes the need to combine both accelerated grid expansion with better use of existing infrastructure to provide more immediate relief. In the UK, we see a change there in revenue regulation of distribution utilities. So they're moving to taking these capital and operational expenditures, treating them as a single cost base, or this TOTEX approach, and also evaluating distribution utilities based on their performance, the reliability of the system, speed of connection, but also customer satisfaction, for example. Moving then to permitting and connections. What the goal is here is that we can connect new supply and demand assets at speed and scale. Key challenges in this case are case-by-case manual assessments, that is usually the practice in a lot of utilities, are being overwhelmed by the growing number of application volumes. There is fragmented permitting across multiple authorities and multiple levels of government, which leads to delays and uncertainty. There are unclear or outdated grid codes and equipment standards, which leads to conservative behavior from utilities when they're assessing a request, and also to delays. Limited digitalization, we'll deal with that more extensively in our fourth point, but it also has its role here. Inefficient allocation of existing grid capacity. This is one of the key points, actually, where when a connection is awarded, it's usually what they call a firm contract. So you're getting the whole capacity all of the time, but that actually means that a lot of grid capacity is rarely fully used, and there are efficiency gains to be made there. And then bloated connection queues. I mean, the UK and the Netherlands are a great example of this, where you're getting this overwhelm, this speculation, and what that drives is a misallocation of scarce grid capacity. There's not really a consideration in a typical first come, first serve approach of what project might add the most benefit to the power system or is ready the quickest. And so priority actions in that context, we say, is digitalizing these processes end to end, is coordinating across agencies, for example, through things like one-stop shops, is to introduce differentiated pathways based on the expected impact. It only makes sense that a small-scale residential solar system does not need the same treatment as a bigger commercial and industrial one. Updating grid codes and publishing standardized equipment lists to accelerate processing. Introducing flexible allocation of grid capacity through so-called non-firm or flexible connection agreements, things like dynamic operating envelopes. And finally, also managing the connection queue. So, for example, with milestone management, you can move forward as soon as you have your permits or you've secured your funding, and you don't have to wait until the person in the queue before you gets there. But also setting timelines and accountability on the utility side so that if they don't respond within a certain amount of time, for example, you're deemed automatically approved. Two examples to highlight here. The Philippines simplified its connection requirements for small PV. So they simplified some of the grid impact study requirements and introduced a 20-day processing timeline for PV systems up to 100 kilowatts. And South Africa's certified inverter list, they maintain this list of approved PV inverters that comply with grid codes, which removes the need for case-by-case assessment. Moving to operations then, flexibility is the keyword. It's something that we've been focusing on at Agora for a long time, and we think that also in the distribution grid, this is a key aspect. So here, this is about turning those distributed energy resources from a challenge into an opportunity. The key challenges here is that there can be missing or conflicting incentives for utilities to leverage DERs, particularly when distribution functions are bundled with retail, for example, or with certain generation functions as well. There can be absent or misaligned signals to coordinate DER behavior. For example, time of use tariffs may serve the system level, but can create actually worse conditions on a local level. There can be barriers for DRs to access markets or aggregate. So there might not even be system service markets, or there might be a high minimum bid size, which makes it hard for those resources to tap in. And of course, those conservative operating limits that I was talking about earlier leaves hosting capacity for DRs underutilized. Priority actions in this area are the reform of those regulations to oblige or at least incentivize utilities to procure DR services, to set technical standards for DR observability, control, and interoperability, to implement rule-based flexibility mechanisms. We don't need full-blown virtual power plants from the start. With simpler mechanisms, we can already start tapping into their flexibility potential. To introduce grid-friendly coordination signals or dynamic tariffs that reflect both system and local conditions, and to explicitly develop system service markets and enable DR aggregation for their participation in such markets. Two examples to flag here. One that's been going for over a decade. That's a very simple program, but can be very effective. The Peak Smart Air Conditioning program from Energex in Queensland. They put a little device in your air conditioning unit that they can just send a remote one-way signal to that will then curtail demand for a little bit. Doesn't turn it off, just lowers it for a bit. And this helps limit peak demand events or congestion in certain events and can defer grid investments or even generation investments. And customers get cashbacks in return to incentivize participation. Electric vehicle flexibility in the UK. So Octopus Energy, one of the players in this field that's working a lot on demand side flexibility, DR flexibility. They shift the charging of their customers' electric vehicles to avoid peak demand times. And in one particular distribution grid in the UK, the one run by Northern Power Grid, they're providing 320 megawatt hours of storage. This is 2024 using this kind of solution. Moving then to digitalization, and this is really the foundation for everything. It's the fact that digital technology and solutions have gone down in cost so much and grown in capability so much that makes a lot of this possible, and it's why it wasn't there in the past when things were more expensive and less capable. This is about building the visibility and control for active grid management. So challenges here are today there's limited observability or visibility, if you will, in medium and especially lower voltage networks. There's limited control and manual interventions that operators still do a lot in distribution grids, cannot really keep up with new dynamic circumstances. There are weak data foundations, so that's to say there's incomplete or outdated GIS, graphical information system models about the grids or DER registries. And there are workforce constraints that hinder the uptake of digital solutions. Workforce constraints apply more broadly, but we highlight it here because the nature of the work is also changing. Priority actions for this domain are about introducing a clear investment framework for digitalization. Some utilities don't do it because they're not allowed really by their regulators to do it at the scale that's needed. To develop data privacy and cybersecurity governance frameworks, to strengthen data foundations, to start rolling out advanced metering infrastructure and also progressively expand monitoring from medium voltage into low voltage, to deploy advanced operational tools like advanced distribution management systems or DER management systems proportionate to the DER level, and to invest early in the workforce. Two examples to highlight here, the smart meter program in India. They're planning to roll out 250 million smart meters. They're at about 50 million at the end of last year. The program has a couple goals, but one of them is to build the grid's data foundation to enable this modernization at scale. Another regional example, Vietnam, rooftop solar control platform. So EVN, the utility, developed a solar energy management system in response to the boom of PV that they saw, which was causing some grid issues. And this digital platform enables real-time monitoring, remote scheduling, and automatic output control. Brings me to the final point to highlight here, which is transmission distribution coordination. And there the idea is that where they were very separate in the past, now they have to really start talking to each other extensively to manage a decentralizing power system as a whole. Key challenges here, there are institutional barriers. Even in a vertically integrated utility, there might be different departments and still work as silos, but also when they're separate companies or entities, there are barriers to coordination and cooperation. They may again have misaligned incentives, because if the transmission operator also has a generation function, it may not want DERs the kind of scale that might eat into that revenue. So there's things to figure out there as well. If they don't coordinate, you get counteracting effects. So actions taken at one level that undermine reliability or conditions at the other level. And overall, of course, if they don't cooperate extensively, there's missed opportunities for planning and operational optimization. The priority actions here that we discuss in the brief is defining the roles and responsibilities, particularly as they relate to distribution grid operations very clearly, and how the interactions are with the other functions, with safeguards against self-preferencing. If you have a generation function bundled with your distribution function, you may want to turn to those for system services instead of creating a fair playing field for also DR assets that you do not own as a utility. You need to develop data exchange platforms and protocols across the transmission distribution interface to make sure that you can actually coordinate for planning and for operations. You then need to mandate joint or coordinated planning with shared scenarios, again, so that infrastructure investment is aligned. And then you need to coordinate real-time operations, and this can include a variety of things like harmonizing grid codes, but also procedures and technologies for reserving, activating, and settling DER flexibility services. Two examples to highlight here. TSO, DSO data exchange in Denmark, Italy, and Spain. There's a pilot project going on there where they are trialing the sharing of data to enable the acquisition of DR flexibility and monitor the related performance. And more broadly within the European Union, TSOs and DSOs coordinate through their sector bodies, the European Network for Transmission System Operators of Electricity, or ENSO-E, and the EU's DSO entity, and they work together on a range of topics. This includes grid codes, data exchange, coordinated system planning, operation, integration of DRs, and so on. That is a lot that needs to be done, which is why also in the brief we try to break it down and try to prioritize and sequence what needs to happen. And for that purpose, we introduce a three-phase framework. because the level of DER deployment determines the complexity of the operational challenges. When you're in a low phase, it's mostly that your legacy frameworks are not ready for what's about to come, so you have to make sure that the foundations are in place. When you get to a medium phase and you start to see operational challenges, you start to see them manifesting, and you need to shift distribution grid operations to active system management. Not yet again fully blown, but you need to start implementing certain changes and do some of the simpler things to then finally evolve to a challenge situation where the challenges are systemic and what you need is full modernization. At this point, what's happening at distribution is determining the pattern of operations of the system as a whole. So you need your distribution grids to operate dynamically and efficiently at scale. What we do is we take this framework and our 5 priorities, and so we break down. I'm not going to go through this because this is too much information, but I just wanted to flag this to you, and this is in the brief for you to dig in deeper, is essentially the point we're trying to make it is that policymakers and utilities can sequence their actions by DR deployment level, and this gives them the opportunity to allocate their limited resources strategically. Start where you need to start, and you can hold off for some of the stuff that comes later and prepare in parallel as DR deployment increases in your system. So with all of that, I want to end with the 2 points I said at the beginning. First one being on governance. Governance is really the key to scaling proven grid modernization solutions. The governance of distribution grids varies considerably around the world, and this shapes the incentives of the entities that are managing the distribution grid. So it goes from vertically integrated systems like PLN, where everything's under one roof, to fully unbundled, what we see with DSOs in the EU. Now, in all of those setups, you need deliberate interventions, governance reforms to really take advantage of the DR opportunity and to advance distribution grid modernization at speed and at scale. And we highlight this in 3 calls to action, so to say. The first is about aligning incentives. So rewarding utilities for performance instead of just investment, reliability, efficiency, speed, so that they go for the solutions that serve the system the best as a whole. Enabling competition, that is to say, a lot of DRs will be owned by consumers, and so we want to make use of them. And also a lot of innovation is still possible. While there are a lot of proven solutions, especially at the cutting edge, there's still a lot of things that can be figured out and can be improved about how to operate VPPs and so on. So give DRs access to markets for flexibility and system services, and let competition drive innovation and bring down costs in those cases. And then finally, involving consumers. Consumers should get a meaningful say in how the grids and the power systems are governed. If they own an increasingly large share of the assets that we want to use to manage the power system, they should be getting a seat at the table. And so then to conclude, bringing it back to Southeast Asia, what we see here is that most countries in Southeast Asia are in the early phases of DR deployment, and that gives them an opportunity to leapfrog to decentralized consumer-centric systems. I come back to Dimitri's introduction, these converging factors. So we're seeing rapid demand growth from industry, from cooling, from electric vehicles, and so on. We're seeing falling clean tech costs that is driving the adoption, including by consumers, of a variety of distributed energy resources. We're seeing energy security at the center of the policy agenda, and DRs again have the potential to contribute to that. And we're seeing that they're mostly in phase 1 conditions. They're not seeing issues on the distribution grid yet, maybe some hotspots in certain urban environments, but as we've shown, things can go really, really quickly. So this is the moment to start acting. And how to act? Well, that's the opportunities you can design for decentralization from the off. So learn from frontrunners. A lot of technologies and solutions have been figured out, experience has been built, and learn from them what you can to avoid the congestion costs and connection delays that we're seeing in those countries. Avoid lock-in to centralized models by establishing performance and DR-friendly governance and regulatory frameworks early on. Start now. A lot of the phase 1 actions that we identify are relatively low cost and low complexity, but they yield benefits across the trajectory. So it's important and valuable to start as early as possible. And that will set you up to capture the full benefits that DRs can offer in terms of affordability, reliability, sustainability, and equity. And just to end on a personal note, I think of this a bit as how a lot of countries in the regions largely skipped laying the phone lines and went straight to building the cell towers. I think for Southeast Asia, distributed energy resources, the availability of cheaper digital technology is providing this kind of opportunity to modernize energy systems from the outset as well. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Dimitri. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Arne, very much for this tour de force, bringing us both very broad but also quite deep into the challenge of transforming the distribution grid infrastructure with, I think, a very clear framing to think the different stage and also the different policy intervention around, as you mentioned, planning, permitting, flexibility, enlockment, digitalization, and the coordination between the different voltage levels. This is great. We'll bring a lot of this framing into our discussion later on, and I thank you again. And we may come back to you if there is specific question on the framing coming from the audience. But now I would like to move to our second presentation, and it's my real pleasure to welcome Dr. Tarinya Supasa, who is leading the ASEAN Renewable Energy Initiative at the ASEAN Center for Energy, ACE. Tarinya is a long-lasting expert around renewable energy development and strategy and policy initiative. And within ACE, she's advancing the energy transition and support the ASEAN 2045 vision. Tarinya's works also include partnership engagement across the ASEAN member, so the 10 or 11 members now, with a particular focus on strengthening collaboration for renewable energy development. So today, Tarinya will share with us some perspective on distributed energy resource in Southeast Asia. I'm very excited to hear your input, Tarinya. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Thank you for very kind introductions and also very comprehensive presentations. Arne, congratulations on your good works. And I think, as Dimitri already introduced me, so today I would like to provide some insight, closer look into Southeast Asia. So actually, when we are speaking about Southeast Asia, we also have another name, which is called ASEAN. So ASEAN is more about the name which has come from the, convening and also formulating together 11 countries in Southeast Asia in the, economic formulations, and then we call ASEAN. So basically, ASEAN and Southeast Asia is the same names, same persons. And yes, thank you very much, Agora Energiewende, for having me today. And for those of you who probably not familiar yet with ASEAN Center for Energy, or ACE, so ACE is the intergovernmental organization, represent 11 countries in Southeast Asia, but also working focusingly on the energy topics. And yes, start from here. So I would like to invite you to closer look into how the trend or the dynamic look like when we're speaking about the variable renewable energy in the regions. So I think from last year, we here as the ASEAN community endorsed one of the documents at the ministerial level, which is called the ASEAN Renewable Energy Roadmap. But one of observations that had been compiled from the collective visions from the country member. So you might observe that in next 5 and 10 years. So it will be the structural change and also reordering when we are speaking about the energy installations capacity. And yeah, the trend that we compile from the input from the member state is showing that the trend is leaning towards more renewable energy, and especially solar and wind will be more than fossil fuel, maybe in upcoming years. So that will also have implication into kind of the transition that will likely to be happens, at least from the national planning perspective, plus with a minimum optimization input. But maybe the question now is not only about increasing the install capacity and also focusing on generation, but also how ASEAN can move towards together on the power system integration and a better planning to ensure that it can be accommodates this kind of the expected vision leaning toward higher variable renewable energy. So zoom out a bit into the national level, because in previous slide, we are looking as a whole region. In reality, this region is quite fragmented in terms of the diversification on planning and also the power system transformation. So speaker into, let's divide that into the phase of the variable renewable energy integration. So you might observe that some country will be a bit more leading roles in the region. So for example, Vietnam, Cambodia, and also Philippines. So for this country will be by 2030, which is next 4 years and a half, likely to shift their power system towards solar, wind, more than, let's say, phase four, which is mean around 30% of their power generation mix. Meanwhile, the other country in the regions, for example, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, will be a kind of a similar mix between would like to balance their power mix, which is go for more dispatchable and also undispatchable renewable energy source. So what this figure tell us, and also what this figure try to imply on what we have to be ready and also what have to be prepared in fronts. So here again, it reflects the visions on what the country is seeing themselves that they would like to be by 2030. And then that's lead into the question around the maybe the different flexibility, that's different need across country needs to be discussed further. And also the power system flexibility beyond the generation that will become more structural required. And that lead to some different level of coordination that have to become more critical and also will be more crucial that the country in Southeast Asia needs to put on the table. So when we are speaking about, yes, state of play, especially on the distributed energy resource, so where are we in 11 country energy transition planning? Before we go into the metrics that showing, where the state that co and where each country are. So when we're speaking about the distributed energy resource itself, so we also brainstorm with the member state to consider beyond the generation, because one of the observation is mostly the discussion likely heavily on the generation, but also it shall need to cover the other dimension as well. So when we evaluate here, then we also cover 5 dimensions. Covering the first one is generation, and the second one is also the distributed flexibility resource that shall be integrated and also considered for the planning as well. And the third one is about the demand side flexibility, which is covering kind of peak shifting, demand response, and not only the DR resource, but also the perspective of the integration layer shall be included in the priority and also shall be included in the move forward next step action as well. For example, what actually happens in the local system and also the market architecture will look like for the microgrid and also peer-to-peer trading, and for the smart meter and smart grids advancement and the next policy paper. So here we go. So for this table, just would like to address kind of where each country are at this current stage. So the green color, of course, present some planning, those 5 kind of key dimension, how far and how it integrated or embedded into the national planning. Yellow color is more about, yes, it's present somehow, but it's probably not yet really in the core discussion. But the gray color is kind of maybe some rooms still need to be strengthened more. And of course, if we are comparing vertically into the 5 dimensions. And you will see the more readiness, the more familiarity of the discussion is go around distributed generation side, because from the country in the region, when we're speaking about distributed energy resource, it still go around less focusing on distributed solar rooftop, also battery system. And with some extent, it also some country also move into the distribution level enabler, such as smart grid, smart meter plan. Meanwhile, for some level of the consideration on the flexibility resource and also demand side approach, and also the market architecture at the local system is still more or less, need some more work, and also need to push more priority and efforts. And yeah, so that means in terms of the DR is still often planned to the technology wise, but not yet really considered thoroughly in the system integration wise. Again, for these metrics, let's try to present in terms of the perspective if we are considered for the technology red deployment and versus the system integration. Meanwhile, for the x-axis there is present about which one is more commonly adopted in the region and which one is more about still less, widespread and still considered as the emerging, some sort of that. And then we'll kind of, this is the observation that in the region, just we still more on the, focusing largely on the technology led. Meanwhile, it's quite obvious for widely adopt of the DR enterprise when we are speaking about, of course, solar rooftop, prosumer, net metering. But when we are speaking about, let's say, storage with electric vehicle related flexibility, or the other system on BESS, for example, they're still relatively emerging. And that's mean from ASEAN entity like ACE together with the country, we still need to push more work, particularly in these coming years as a short term. And meanwhile, when we're speaking about the visible in planning, I think the integration layer of DR is critical, but still less, consistent in the national framework. And the last one, when we are speaking about the other dimension of the microgrid of grid that still need to apply and has been applied for some country, but still again needs to be unsilo and maybe facilitate peer-to-peer and also encourage our member state to learn from each other, but also learning from the international lesson that can be adopt and also adapt into the regions. And that will be more or less to show you quickly about what happens so far in Southeast Asia. And this is just summarized about the key takeaway from my side. So where are we today? So we are, yes, considering more options for rooftop PV, which is not surprise. And we are discussing more about the component, which is emerging but ongoing, which is more on storage, demand side measures. And in terms of the planning, is still more or less related to technology led. But what needs to be changed so far, and it has to be, increase the awareness that solar, wind, and also, let's say, variable renewable will become more like the baseline in coming years. So that will increase the urgency and also the need for system reliability, and also needs to also work more on nations, and integration become one of the quite a crucial issue. And also lead to the future planning that putting there, the shift from the deployment into integration. I think that become more narrative, and also the DER is not just generation, but also DER flexibility also needs to be thoroughly and also more strongly concerned. And the readiness of the system when we are speaking about the digitalization real-time with visibility, it have to be something important in very coming year. And also the last one for the distribution level framework that needs to be including the grid readiness and also market integration. And I think this more or less about the quick bite from the regions. And thank you very much. Maybe back to you, Dimitri.
Thanks a lot, Tarinia, for sharing those very valuable perspectives from the region and highlighting where the different countries stand, what is happening, what needs to change, which are some of the front runners, where some barriers need to be alleviated. I think there will be a lot to go into a more specific aspect of what you presented, and maybe we can bring this also in some of the discussion. It is quite striking to me to see how distributed energy resource, I mean, you mentioned specifically solar PV, is effectively reshaping the grid landscape across the region, and that we need the right policy actions to help to turn this, into an opportunity for the region. So I will move now to the panel, and again, I may bring the first two speakers also in the discussion if we have a specific angle to highlight. We would like to take a slightly broader perspective on the challenge, looking also at it from different regions. We'll have about 35 minutes for this discussion. And I will call three actually panelists. The first one will be Dr. Irfan Yousaf. Mr. Yousaf, we are very glad you could join us. Mr. Yousaf is a Pakistan-based consultant specializing in energy regulation, power market, and climate finance with more than 20 years of experience with various organizations in Pakistan, but also with the World Bank, United Nations, UNDP program, ADB, GIZ, and so on. We are also going to be joined by Mr. Yoonwa Ra. I hope I pronounce your name properly, who is General Manager at KEPCO, the Korean Electric Power Corporation, which is the largest electricity utility in South Korea. It's really a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Ra, so you can give us a perspective from the Korean experience in how utilities, planning, network development, and power system transformation. At least we are delighted to welcome Dr. Gabriele Kuiper, who is the Australia and Southeast Asia at CSIRO, which is a Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, so National Science Agency from Australia. And her work focuses on shaping policy and regulation to accelerate the integration of DER resources. So a very warm welcome to the three of you. It's great that you could join us today. And I would like to start actually with Pakistan, Dr. Irfan. I think a lot of us in the community has looked at Pakistan over the last few years because your country has experienced a very strong solar boom. And I think it's a very interesting case, but also a very timely one for this discussion. So I would like just to ask you a first quite high-level question. We know there have been a boom, but we also know that there have been some constraints, right, in the way the system reacted to this boom of solar PV. Could you tell us what has been the missing signal that the system was not ready, and how then this has to this very strong increase of solar rooftop and solar PV in general?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, this is an amazing discussion which is happening, and this is a right time to venture into these kinds of discussions when we are going to see a lot of transformation in Southeast Asia. Yeah, actually, when we were starting this net metering, we were expecting that the transition will be very smooth and it will not have any projectile increase in any case, and then we'll be having a smooth transition that will help us transmitting the solar load coming on very easily, and making this transition for the distribution companies to absorb very easily. But after 2021, what we have seen an influx of a lot of solar coming in, and that wasn't because of love for solar or love for nature or love for renewable energy, but because of the huge increase of electricity prices. and huge decrease of solar cost. From 2016 to 2021, the total installed capacity of solar net metering systems in Pakistan was not more than 1 megawatt. And even till 2023, it was 1.3 megawatts. But afterwards, it started jumping. And now we have seen it's touching 8 gigawatts, which is huge right now. And 8 gigawatts means it's around nearly around 4.5. You can say 30% of total installed capacity of Pakistan, which is very huge number which is coming across. Um, of course, grid was not ready for this kind of trajectory increase, and it was not uh, addressed properly. There were 5 important elements which were not taken into account while doing so. The planners and they could not foresee this kind of increase in the addition of solar system in the system. Decentralized planning, and this could start for capex and distribution electricity being treated like that. They have to give licenses without any due diligence or any kind of a system study analysis. It went into wrong, and the permitting system, they could not stop consumers to get connected with the grid. As a result, there was uh, lack of planning and lack of addition of other sources that could have increases the grid flexibility that would have treated this problem in a better way. But because of lack of this grid flexibility, addition of solar, that created a lot of problems for the distribution companies. At the same time, one of the biggest challenges is that the distribution companies still rely upon manual systems. Their systems are still to be digitized. Only three to four distribution companies that are 60 to 70% digitized. Rest all are still depending upon their manual operations. There are no smart meters penetration right now. This is very limited interventions done in K Electric or East Islamabad region or Lahore region. And also an initiative taken by the Gujranwala Electric Power Company, but this is very limited. And because of the lack of digitalization, the overall management that become very tricky for the distribution companies. Lastly, the transmission and distribution coordination has been very weak between distributors and National Grid Company. This creates a stranded capacity at the scene, and because of which the financial liquidity in the power sector that really gone into very bad situation. And because of this, the government has not been able to kick in the power market mechanism, which was originally designed to be launched in 2022. Just because the liquidity is not there, and because of lack of liquidity, the power sector cannot manage any kind of a new interventions or any kind of new businesses. So these are the 5 important elements that were missing. And we feel that we need to plan better for this prosumers boom. For that purpose, now what the government has done, they have switched from net metering to net billing. They're now working with the consumers to become partners instead of just creating net metering load as negative load. Rather, they're trying to make them as small IPPs who will be contributing at the lesser prices, and it will become very cost conducive for the distribution companies and the government to get this cheap electricity into the system. At the same
Thanks
time,
a lot, Mr. Irfan. Let's just pause here one moment, and thanks a lot already for these elements. it's very interesting. First, your assessment of what has been maybe lacking and what are now some of the expected solutions for this development going forward. But I just would like to come to one point that you raised, which we also actually mentioned earlier. This is the question of having a sufficient controllability of the system, but also visibility of the system. And on that, I would like to take the opportunity to switch to another country, and then we'll come back to you. And I would like to ask Mr. Ra from KEPCO, because I think South Korea is seen as one of the examples where a distribution system stands in the way it has been digitalized and has included very modern tools. So in the context of having a lack of controllability and visibility abilities, I would like to understand a little bit better from the Korean perspective. What has been the driver in Korea to modernize the distribution grid the way you did? And what you would recommend typically for other countries or other utilities who are just beginning this journey, and maybe some that could be potentially also be interesting for Pakistan or similar countries. So Mr. Ra. Oh, you're still muted, Mr. Ra. Mr. Ra, we cannot hear you. Can you just unmute yourself?
Sorry, I forgot.
Here we go.
Okay.
No,
Yes.
all good.
Yeah, that's really a good question. What led us to modernize our distribution grid? That's the key question I got just from you. I think before 2000, the main reason we modernized our grid is to reduce the time of power outage. So even we need to digitalize our grid. We need to get a tool to monitor our grid in a distribution center simultaneously, and we have to control our equipment as soon as possible. That was the most power. That's one of the important factor KEPCO has been working on. But after 2000, the time of power outage has been reduced rapidly. So the frequency of a power outage is not that important anymore. So many people in Korea they say they have never experienced power outage in their life. If we talk to the elementary school kids, so so what we're gonna do at this moment. So from 2010, we started to accept a lot of DERs, specifically power solar panels in our grid. So at this moment, in terms of number, 99% of solar generators are connected to distribution grid. In terms of capacity, about 70% are connected to our distribution grid. So at some regions, specifically in Jeju Island or west-south part of our peninsula, those lines have already too much DERs out of the capacity. So some of the DERs, when I say DERs in Korea, those are mostly solar panels, solar generators in our status. So solar generators have been waiting in the queue to get connected to the grid. So what we are saying, how can we increase the capacity? I mean, the capacity of DERs in our distribution lines. That's the one main key question we have. To do so, by this time, the way to control the amount of DERs in our grid is the way of feed and forget. So we set the standard line. Let's say we have one distribution line. We can connect 10 megawatt of DERs in our line in a way of the total amount of solar generators. So it doesn't matter how much energy these solar generators make at the certain time. So, but when we think about grid at the night or in the bad weather, those lines are totally not using, right? So we are thinking a new way to use our distribution grid more smart, in a better way, in an efficient way. So we are at this moment, we try to change this concept to like fit different stage using the energy storage systems or using ADMS or and any other technical tools and measures. So that's what we do. That's what this government is trying to do, including KEPCO. We are at the stage to invest quite a lot of money to install battery energy storage system in our grid. But at this at the current market, energy storage investors cannot get enough money from the market. So the government is trying to give a certain amount of money, like 50% of total needed installment fee. That money comes from the government, and the other 50% will be funded by the local or the player in the market. So by doing so, we are encouraging more players to join the market, more players to install the energy storage system in the grid, and using those DERs, we can increase the amount of DERs at the same facilities, of our grids. So.
Just on that, if I may ask, Mr. Va, because there is indeed an investment which have been done early on, and now you also bring other, let's say, non-wire solutions. But how do you bring also regulatory reform, let's say, to incentivize this solution and ensure that they will be operating in a way which is system friendly? Because I believe beyond technical and financial investment, you need to have a regulatory design which will really promote, a system compliance, so to say, use of this infrastructure. Could you tell us a little bit more beyond the infrastructure? Really, what are the signals in terms of incentive which are designed in Korea?
We have I think we are going towards to that incentivized market in two ways. First of all, we are changing the market. Before this stage, our market is totally operated by cost-based cost-based pool. So SMP is not actually decided by the market. Government have the way to interfere the proper stage of the SMP. But now renewables can join the market. They have the right to set up the price in the market, right? From the Jeju, and this scheme will be adopted from the mainland area from this September this year. So that is the one way, and the other ways is this time government is trying to create a new supervision agency, which can monitor the market and the power system in a neutral way, in a neutral and independent and transparent way. So right now in Korea, there is only one utility and the government and only one transmission system operator. But from this year, we are working on creating a new agency which can supervise the market and power system in a neutral way. So that will be two ways. Yes.
I understand very well. It's interesting how you try to promote decentralization also through a central infrastructure and oversight, right, to some extent. I'm moving to Gabriel Kuiper. You have a very broad perspective on those issues also from different markets, so specifically in Southeast Asia, but you have experience with Australia and other countries. Going a bit deeper in this question of regulatory and policy framework, could you give us some insights from your perspective of, what needs to be done? I mean, building also on what Arne presented earlier, but in terms of ensuring that the grid will incentivize the growth of distributed energy resources rather than become a bottleneck for the integration. So how regulation can ensure that we really capture this change of paradigm which is needed at the distribution edge?
Thanks for the question, Dimitri, and thanks to Agora Energiewende for the opportunity to speak with you all today. It's a great question. I love your metaphor for the report about making the last mile the first mile, but I'll add in my favourite metaphor, which is the rejoinder to what most of you have probably heard is there is no transition without transmission. We've probably all heard that, but as Ty Christopher at University of Wollongong likes to say, but the revolution will be in distribution. So what we're talking about here, and I think has been well outlined by everyone who's spoken so far, is the scale of the challenge here. Ultimately, when you have large-scale renewables, there's still one-way transmission from a wind or solar farm to people's homes and businesses. When you're looking at distributed energy resources, you have to completely revolutionise the way that distribution system operates. And so my scheme, I liked Arne's steps of sort of first, second, third order. The way I think about it is, to your question about regulation, is that there's technical regulation, then there's the sort of what we think about standard energy market regulation in terms of connections and the like, and then there is the economic regulation, particularly of distribution networks. And we need to do, of course, everything all at once, but starting with the technical, obviously there are things like the connection arrangements that are vital, and I'll just give one example to this issue that's been talked about quite a lot already in terms of congestion on distribution networks as a result of lots of rooftop solar feeding in. As people on the call may know, Australia has more rooftop solar per person than any other country in the world. In fact, a third of households have rooftop solar. In the states of South Australia and Queensland, it's half of all households. So in South Australia, for example, the distribution system most of the time during the day is acting as a net generator feeding up into the transmission system. So the point about distribution transmission coordination is well made. But then there's the question that Mr. Ra raised about how do you manage that network congestion and how do you do that in a more dynamic way if you're thinking about dynamic hosting capacity. So the smart engineers at South Australian Power Networks thought at first we had a static 5 kilowatt export limit for basically all household or small business rooftop solar. And they recognised that that wasn't very intelligent because hosting capacity, as has been mentioned, varies by season, by time of day. And so they said, well, how could we have a signal that tells the inverter that this is how much they can export in a particular time? So they developed this software of dynamic operating envelopes. So that meant that they could double the static limit of 5 kilowatts to 10 kilowatts for rooftop solar, but that would need to be constrained at certain times. And when I first heard about this, I was like, this sounds fantastic. You know, maybe 50, 60% of the time, you'll be able to double the hosting capacity. What South Australian Power Networks found, once they had developed the software and did the modelling, is that they could double that hosting capacity 98% of the time. And I think this is a really important point, is that it's only at particular times that the distribution networks are constrained. And if we take a static approach to managing the networks, then we set undue limits that dramatically restrict the speed of decarbonisation. But if we can put dynamic limits in place, in the case of South Australia, it's only in spring when there's low load and high solar generation that they basically need to dial back those rooftop solar systems. So really wanted to give that as a smart example of the technical, and there is regulation supporting that. And obviously that goes to the connection agreements with customers. And then there's also been discussion around, at the other end of the scale, the economic regulation and how do we unlock what the Americans call non-wires and alternatives, or the British call flexibility services from distributed energy resources. And I can talk to that more if you'd like.
I would be interested, yes, and maybe just now also, so then we can then bring this back to the other panelists, but specifically on the design of dynamic tariff or similar regulation to incentivize those various solutions. Could you tell us a little bit more what is actually best practice you encountered?
Yeah, so Britain is far and ahead of the rest of the world in this, and that's because they started before most other people, so most other countries. They started back in 2010 rethinking the economic regulation of their distribution networks. What I always remind people is that the economic regulation of our distribution networks generally came out of 1980s Thatcher's Britain, and renewables were sort of like this distant sci-fi glimmer on the horizon back then. And given the enormous transformation of the technology, I think we need to, I would be more provocative even than Anna, and I would say we need to completely overhaul the economic regulation of the distribution networks. And we need to rethink it from first principles to create a level playing field between spending money on infrastructure, building more poles and wires and substations, and providing the same network services from whether it's EVs or, in the case of the UK, a lot of it is water utilities, pumping loads, flexing, as well as other forms of generation and flexible demand. The way that this has grown over the years in Britain, and with the support, I should note, of all of the distribution businesses there, which has been fantastic, is that last year they doubled the amount of flex services or non-wires alternatives that were provided by people's homes and businesses, jumped from 4.5 to 9 gigawatts. And that is only going to continue to grow. So if you own a battery, say 10 kilowatts in Britain in a network constrained area, and 20% of the network is constrained, you can earn £331 per year of providing services to the grid from that battery. So that has not been an easy process. It's taken a lot of time, but Britain is reaping the benefits of that. So my number for Australia, if we made the most of DR in our network and used it to provide network services, we used it to substitute for building large-scale generation and storage, and also obviously reducing the amount of network spend, full stop, is that would be $19 billion net present value by 2040. And one other thing I'll add is that there is a project underway between myself and a company called Bluenomi for the Global Grids Catalyst to try and develop an open source method of quantifying the economic benefits of DER globally and providing that as a resource that people can use at a nation state level. I think we haven't taken the small stuff seriously, and that's been the case in Australia as much as anywhere else. But once you start looking at the inherent logic and the benefits of having all of these distributed energy resources, the economic benefits really add up.
Well, thanks a lot, Gabrielle. You're a revolution maker, but also a pragmatic one with economic, let's say, rationale. So I would like to come back to another revolution, which is the one we observed in Pakistan, because I think it's a totally different scale, also in terms of how the grid was not ready with all what we discussed, but the revolution happened anyhow. But now, going back to you, Mr. Irfan, how do you think, listening to what we just had from the other panelists, what would be now the important steps for Pakistan to better align the grid's development plan, not only the infrastructure, but also all what we discussed, so non-wire solution, regulatory reforms, to ensure that effectively this growth, which has been very impressive in solar PV, will sustain in Pakistan and not lead ultimately to a cycle of disruption. What are now really from a planning perspective, but also an operational perspective, the priority for your country?
Yeah, thank you again. A very interesting question. There are 3-4 fronts wherein now the planning is going on and where the experts are helping the government to realign its pathway to embrace this solar rush within the country. Number one, the plan is to create more resilience within the grid. Now they are asking all the distribution companies to become very vigilant for overall the process for net metering and solar. Rather they have shifted from net metering to net billing. They are asking for installation of AMI meters and AI AMI infrastructure. They're improving on the utility governance, digitalization, DER integration, and also linking with the flexibility options like linking with the gas power plants and the hydropower plants at times when the solar radiations are varying. In addition, they have worked on the tariff design mechanisms to make it financially viable for the country to include more solar within the system. So this is what is currently happening, and the future, which based on the learning from what the other speakers have indicated, and how I would like to recommend to the government in 3 to 4 ways. First of all, there are technology innovations that are happening all around the world. We need to embrace those. We need to work upon this ancillary services regulations to make this business more conducive and private led. The businesses like the battery energy storage services, EV grid integration services, these need to be made into account for the purpose of making the solar usable for the other technological interventions. Energy services companies and corporate green PPAs we are already promoting, but this is an area we need to work upon, where aggregators and virtual power plants can come across, and they can develop the blending and corporate financing mechanisms to utilize this solar capacity for the better utilization in the commercial sector. At the regulatory level, of course, the regulations are in the market, but they're still looking at how they can make it more performance-based regulations, and giving out some signals for time of use and dynamic tariffs, standardized interconnections. And once the power market is rolled out, the next step will be that the distribution level market rules, how this will be taken into place. This whole system is going to take into account for the purpose of utilizing the solar rush in a very conducive way, and so that it should not be overburdening the system at times when the electricity demand is not there.
Thanks a lot. So this would somehow be the second revolution for the solar PV boom in Pakistan, right? Moving to this really system integration and grid integration perspective. I would like to come back to Mr. Ra. We have addressed already a lot of the aspect around, planning, the way we can better monitor and control the system. One aspect that has been raised by Gabriel was also regarding the flexible allocation of grid capacities, or let's say the flexible use of this capacity. I could imagine that in Korea, in the context also of the whole data center development that we see more and more actually competition for the grid actually connection. I would be interested to get your view, if you could give us some insights on how Korea is currently dealing with this situation. So not all of them may be at the distribution level, but what are you thinking about specific mechanism for grid capacity allocation, and also dynamic actually use of this capacity in order to incentivize and rather than congest the system in a way which is operationally supportive.
Yeah, regarding AI data center, yeah, that's the problem.
I think, unfortunately, the connection is a bit cut. Maybe someone used the
Capital
data
idea
center right now.
where
I know, you're back.
lacks.
Yeah,
Yes.
Mr. Ra.
Can you
We
hear me?
didn't hear you for a couple of seconds. Yes, you're back, please.
Yeah, yes. So, yes, so a lot of data centers want to be connected to grid near the capital, but in the capital, there are enough space for new connection. So our government, CAPCO, are trying to lead them to rural area or suburban area, but it's not easy to bring those centers within light resources. So we try to give them some tax benefits or give some package of benefits, including reducing the tax or shortening the time of connections. But still, it is causing more problems to the grid instead of bring benefits. So lots of researchers, including our research center, is trying to come up with some ways to make these data centers turn into the flexible resources. But it is quite early stage to mention in a reality. So I think it is still a problem worldwide, I think. So Korea, CAPCO is also working on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and these data centers are actually quite a big amount quite a big amount of demand entity, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just a matter of distribution; it's a matter of whole system. So how can we distribute them? How can we incentivize them? How can we read to the right place? Is the questions we have to answer. And secondly, I totally agreed with Dr. Gabriel in that's exactly what we do. We try to be changed our concept of managing our grid from static way to dynamic way, specifically using dynamic operating envelope. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing we are working on. When we manage and control BESS energy storage systems, those resources are actually targeting to join the market, but they have to consider the grid status before joining the market to avoid unnecessary grid congestions. So we are trying to deliver the proper predicted envelope before they enter the market, to let them get more earnings from the market, and also to avoid for us to avoid grid congestions before it happens. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is one. I mean, it could be old concept in academic, but this is the one thing we are trying to implement in our grid in reality.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ra. So revolution are always based on old concepts. It just takes some time to implement them. Once again, I want to thank you all very much. I was planning to have a last round, but I realized we're already almost at the end of this discussion. So I'm sorry, I will need to cut it short here, but with a really, really big thank. And I think we will need to follow up this discussion. Also, maybe deep diving a bit deeper into some of the aspects when it comes to Southeast Asia that we couldn't actually maybe address today as much as I wanted. But again, thank you very much. I think it's very clear through this discussion that the distribution grid is not a secondary layer. So some call it now the revolutionary boundary, so to say. Some other a bit slightly more modest, like us, the first mile of the transition. And this is very important that we bring actually policymaker regulators in line with this need to actually have an holistic view on how to ensure the transformation of the distribution grid is going to be an enabler of the transition and not a bottleneck. So once again, thank you for highlighting all of this experience from different countries in Southeast Asia and beyond. Thanks also, Arne, very much for the framing that was provided, which I think helps to structure the intervention at different times and in different geographic contexts. So once again, thank you very much. If you want to follow up what Agora is actually doing on the topic, and effectively we are also looking at the question of data centers. We just released a study on how they can actually provide flexibility to the system. So stay tuned. We're also working on different aspects regarding grid policy toolkits and how to scale up distributed energy resource in Southeast Asia. So we are very happy to continue discussion with you. So I would like to thank again all the participants for your contribution. We have tried to bring some of the questions in the discussion. Some of them has been answered, some not, but you may receive from our colleagues some written answers if you contributed to this question and answer section.